And welcome to episode number 13 of the OBRY Hours. This is going to be part 2 of Fiddler on the Sun, Israel is Home. I'm not going to do a recap of episode 12. If you're lost, I don't know why you're listening to episode 13. It clearly says on the title, Fiddler on the Sun, Israel is Home, part 2. Go back and listen to part 1. You'll get all the information that lays the groundwork for this in part 1. And yes, it's about 2.5 hours long, and this one may be longer. Before I actually even start going into the verses, because that's what I'm going to do, I'm just diving right back into these verses because it's so important to go through all of the evidence that's available and show you how deception works, how playing with the text and word manipulation works to create a completely different world. And that's why it is so important. Something that I've noticed now, I never really paid a lot of attention to either the whole Tartarian mud flood idea, unless it was kind of random videos. If there was a video that was really making the rounds, I might watch it, and unless they were pushing the same old evil Nazi tropes, which a lot of them do, and other really stupid things that don't reflect reality, which a lot of them do, I never really even commented or got involved. Now, recently, I decided to get involved in establishing more of a presence for the OBRY project via these little, I don't even want to call them memes because they oftentimes involve a lot of text, clippings from books. So whatever you call them, they're images which put some of these things together and have small little brief messages. I got into that because I was looking into books, various sources on Prester John, because I think he is instrumental in establishing this would be the Third Empire in the Bible. So I started putting a lot of those in what few Tartarian and mudflood sort of research groups that I'm in on Facebook, and there's one or two on Gab. And what I started to notice, and this is just straight up, this is not being like malignant or vicious. This is just an honest observation. Most of the people that I've encountered in these groups, most of the people that I've encountered or even interacted with, and that is not implying there are a few of you that are in that area of research that I have interacted with who I think are intelligent people. We may disagree on some things. So this is not everyone. This is a huge, overwhelming majority. They don't do their research, their reading. They're captivated by quick, flashy images and over-the-top sort of assertions. When a video series by whoever this anonymous author is, Ewar Annan, which is a ridiculous name to begin with, when that series is making the rounds the way that it has, and in there, he's literally claiming that this great society all lived together so harmoniously with all of the free energy. It's just ridiculous. It shows a complete lack of understanding of the way people even are. So look, if you want to be lied to, you're in the wrong place. If you want fast, easy garbage, there's a lot out there. And I'll tell you what else I think there's a heck of a lot of out there. And that's Jews posing as blacks and Hispanics on social media. And if you just sit and think about that for a little while, why they would want to pose as blacks and Hispanics, or why they would need to, you'll understand why I think a lot of them are indeed running these accounts that look like they are black and Hispanic or otherwise intellectuals. Just think about it. So anyways, I'll dive right into these passages. I stopped last time with Joshua, and we were in the chapter of Joshua that described a battle that indeed began at night, and then the following day, early in the day, the sun was in the sky, and Joshua asked Yahweh to halt the sun in the sky. Interesting, because there was enough material in that passage to illustrate the point, and there was, of course, an occurrence of Ba with Shamash in there. So that was all I needed. However, interestingly enough, in that passage, there is used a form of the simple root dam for the sun. What the sun did, it's dum. The reason that's interesting is because I brought this up episodes ago when I was talking about Adame and Adam, and the words used to describe Adame and Adam. This word dem, which is what's mostly translated as blood, it bears the idea of something still as a statue, and thus an image. That's why it was used concerning the sun, because it stood still. When you see that word, it should bear the idea of a statue or an image of something else. That's why it's used. So that was just a quick insert there. Now, mostly all of the rest of the passages in Joshua are describing inheritance territory of all of the tribes. So all of the places that we're going to see Shamash in there is really denoting a direction. And so again, these are things that we'll have to circle back around to see what the impact of all of this is. We'll start in Judges 5:31. This is the Song of Deborah. This was after Barak led the army of Israel against Sisera, who was the captain of, I believe it's the king of Hazor. And I'll just start with the English translation of this Song of Deborah, which takes place in Judges chapter 5 and verse 31. Now in English, they translate it for the most part, "So let all thine enemies perish, O Lord, but let them that love him be as the sun when it goes forth in his might." And then it said, "And the land had rest for 40 years. Again, some serious wordplay, wordsmithing here. What she says in here, in fact, she begins with the word kan. It is, whenever you see kan, just K-N, kan, you'll see it a lot actually in Genesis chapter 1. It means something, let something be established, or a matter, okay? And then it's followed by abadu. So it is the verb form of destroying, because bad is the simple root for separating. And if it's abad, it's very separated. So destroyed in the sense of like crumbling, smashed, ground down. Okay. Then followed by kul, which is all or every. Then auyi, beak. And that root there, aib, is enemies. The K at the end signifies your, okay, your enemies, and then followed by Yahweh. So she is saying, essentially, in a mechanical translated way, established to destroy your enemies, Yahweh. And then it goes on to say, eu, which is and his enemies, not Yahweh's. We're talking about the subject being those who hate him. All right. And they're saying, and the lovers of his enemies. They're not speaking of Yahweh. They are speaking of the subject, which is those who hate him. Established to destroy your enemies, Yahweh, and the lovers of his enemies. Then we go on to see Ktsat. And I pointed out in Genesis 19, when it said the sun was Tsa, as Lot entered Zoar, that was going out. Every time you see Tsa, whether it's Tsa, Tsu, in fact, Tsu is used probably most often concerning the laws, statutes, and judgments, because they proceed from Yahweh out to the people, to our commandments. They proceed out from a person or a body, politic, to. So we have katsat as the going out, the going away from, opposite of ba, which is coming near, coming towards, okay? Katsat eshamash, as the going out of the sun, established to destroy your enemies, Yahweh, and the lovers of his enemies, as the going out of the sun. Of course, that makes absolute sense, because there is not only a consistency in the Bible, but in much of our literature concerning darkness and sunset, destruction. There's the symbolism there of destruction, night, darkness, the end of a dynasty, the end of a people or person is represented in a sunset. So since they've had to reverse these terms, they reverse this passage as well. All right, so the next one, this is interesting, and it has a bit more body to it. It's in Judges 9:33. I'll give you a bit of background on this so you can get a grasp of what's going on, because it always helps us to look at context whenever possible. Judges 9 is this really seedy story about what happens with the sons of Gadaun, or Gideon. Gideon became, in the time of Judges, a great hero in Israel. It starts out the story of Gideon in Judges 7 with him being kind of a nobody, and he was hiding, threshing his grain, trying to keep it from the Midianites, because they had invaded the territory of Canaan, and they were taking everything everyone had. They were doing it by force because there were so many of them, and Israel wasn't fighting for some reason. They were, I guess they were saying things like, well, there are rulers, and you know what Paul says in Romans 13. Maybe they were saying something like that. They weren't resisting. They weren't fighting. So Yahweh establishes this great deliverer in the person of Gadaun, or Gideon, who was very insignificant. His family was insignificant in his tribe, which was Manasseh, and Manasseh was insignificant in comparison to Ephraim, which had really, they were a much stronger, much larger tribe than Manasseh was. So he has a lot of sons after this. He gets many wives because he has a great amount of fame now, and power and wealth after all of this occurs. So he has many sons. And one of the sons he has is this woman from Shechem. Now, they translate it as her being perhaps like a harlot, loose woman or something. I don't have any reason to believe she was an Israelite from what I've read. But he has this one son, Abimelech. And Abimelech, because he wants to take power of Shechem. And when you consider the area in Palestine that's supposed to be Shechem, it's like, who would want power over that little place there anyways? I don't know. So what happens is his youngest brother escapes this bloodshed. He murders all of his brothers. His youngest brother escapes, and he pronounces this curse over the men of the city who supported Abimelech. They financed and supported him to go out and be this warlord, murder all his brothers. And the curse that he pronounces is that Abimelech and the men of Shechem will have enmity between them, that there would be a great falling out, and they would basically sort of be one another's doom and destruction. Okay, and this is Judges 9 now is showing us how that actually played out. So it revolves around this city of Shechem, which is sort of nestled in the mountains, and there is a governor there that's essentially a puppet of Abimelech. And so he's looking out for his interests. Now another guy comes along, because remember, Israel erroneously allowed all of these various Canaanite tribes to stay in the land instead of purging them as Yahweh told them to do. So a man from the line of Hamor, and Hamor was a king in Shechem long before this, He's referenced in Genesis, I think it's 33, when Jacob is staying near Shechem. This has to do with Shechem's son Hamor and Jacob's daughter. So anyways, this descendant of Hamor and Shechem, I'm sorry, the son was Shechem, the father was Hamor. Anyways, he sort of comes into this city while Abimelech is gone, doing his thing, and makes this challenge. And Abimelech's servant, who is still in the city, he writes to him telling him how he should go about this. And his servant's name is Zebul. And we have just a couple of verses to look at to see how this is all playing out, and what we should be taking away from not only the verbiage having to do with the son, but we also have Becher appearing in here. So what I'll do, I'll just read the 3 pertinent verses in this passage, because Zebul has written secretly, has written to Abimelech to tell him what's going on and what he thinks he should do in order to reestablish his rule over the city of Shechem. Starting in Judges 9:32, this is Zebul's letter, what Zebul's letter is saying, okay? He already has told him what's going on. He says, "Now therefore, up by night, thou and the people that is with thee, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, thou shalt rise early, and set upon the city. And behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against thee, you may do with them as you shall find occasion." And Abimelech rose up, and all the people that were with him by night, and they laid wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And as I go through the actual wording of this, I might have to explain to you a little bit what happens after this so you understand what is actually going on and how it was altered. Now, first, did you notice how choppy the English was? The translation in verse 9:32, "Now therefore up by night." Yeah, it's because it's really difficult sometimes to make these passages into what they indeed want them to be. And I will tell you that the passage in the source language is a little odd and choppy. However, I can tell you this. So the operative words here are Zerah and Shamash. So we've got the sun here, and we have Zerah. And of course, they have been translating Zerah as the rising of the sun. And so they're making this passage out to be that he's telling them to rise up by night, and then as the way that it would logically flow, even if they wanted to keep their terms as far as Zerah, as in sunrise and all that, then it should go in a flowing manner. It would probably go more like rise up at the time of night, and in Becher, if Becher was morning, as they translate it, as Zerah es Shamash, and then it goes on to say, Tashakim u Pashathat ol e'oir. So he's telling him to make ready, or Tashakim is sort of it sort of alludes to a burden. He's telling him to beset himself upon the city. So, and then again we see after this, we see it's night again in Judges 9:34. Uyekam Abimelech ukol eom. So, and all the people that were with Abimelech at night. Okay, the letter ends in Judges 9:33. So the thing about it is, in 9:32, the language just says uote kum lila ate eom asher atak arab bashade. So he's telling him, most likely, based on the wording, that the night is coming, at the coming of night. And the next verse, and he says for you and the people with you, to get yourself entrenched in the field, besieging the city, round about the city, so that you're basically besieging or blocking the city. And the next verse says, U aya bebaker kezera shamash. Now, if this is evening, if baker is evening instead of morning, kezera as the dissipating sun, then he's telling him that's when tashakim, so the t in a verb, the t at the beginning is indicating that something shall be. And we know that because if we look at the word for to simply be, if something is, the word is eya. It's the simple root is actually iya. If we see that t in front of that, it's always indicating something that shall be, something to come. So he's telling him, you shall do this, that, and the other. Okay, the reason that we know, even based on as odd as the language is, as it's presented herein, we know that all of this happened at night, and he wouldn't be able to move in on the city until it was evening. And I'll show you why, just in the English, okay? Because then it goes on to describe what was happening. Starting in 9:35, it says, And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him from the lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Behold, there come people down from the top of the mountains. And Zebul said unto him, You see a shadow of the mountains, as if it were men. And Gaal spoke again and said, See, there come people down from the middle of the land, and another company come along by the plain of Meonenim. And then said Zebul unto him, Where now is thy mouth? Wherewith thou said, Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Is not this people that thou hast despised? Go out, I pray now, and fight with them. And Gaal went out before the men of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. So what they're saying is that Abimelech was coming down this mountain. So Shechem is a city that was in a mountainous place. Often the mountains that are in the territory of Ephraim are called the Mount of Ephraim. This is a mountainous area. Shechem would have been within that. There would have been mountains maybe on various sides of this city. And if he would have looked out during the day to spy the surrounding land, because he had already put out a challenge to Abimelech, let him come and fight with me. If he had looked out during the day and saw these men coming, he would have been alarmed and ready before the men had beset the city. And if he had looked out and saw men coming down from the mountain during the day, he would have seen that it was men coming down to beset the city long before they ever got there. It is more likely that he was looking out in the night and that he could not clearly see the men coming down to beset the city in the night. And this is the whole reason that he told him to come in the night, so that he wouldn't see them. He wouldn't see that he was in such a precarious position, and that he would have to go out and fight with him face to face in essentially, if you want to call it a fair and even fight. He would have no time to make ready for this to happen. And the whole point of this was to get this guy, Gaal, as they transliterate it, Gol was his name, Gol, Gol, to go out and fight with Abimelech. He would have to come and position himself in the night, which is what he was telling him in the letter. As the Beker, in the evening, as the sun is set, come and besiege the city. It's just that in the way that it is presented, since in the verse before that, he says, Ote kum elile, and the night is coming. And then he goes on to tell him, so let it be, beker, evening, as opposed to morning, ka zera eshemash, as the sun dissipates, then move in. Because he could move large armies in an area like this where the city had such a broad view of the landscape all around it. He would be able to move his men in under cover of night with only the moonlight to see by. Again, if he's looking out, if this guy Gol and Zebul are looking out from the city, which probably had high watchtowers where they could view a lot of the land, if they were looking out at in the morning or during the daytime at all, he would clearly see that these large dark areas that he was viewing were men. They were armies. It wouldn't be hard. He wouldn't mistake that. But under the cover of night, it appeared to be shadows, which is exactly why Zebul says when Gaul notices these large dark masses moving from the mountain, he says he thinks they're people, and Zebul says to him, no, you're just seeing the shadow of the mountain. That's not an army. That's happening at night. He told him, as the sun sets, then move in on the city to besiege it. So we can see that with just how choppy the language was that they had to use to try to make Zerah sunrise. And we clearly see night on either side of that verse, letting us know that he was telling him that he would have to move in under the cover of darkness. It's far more obvious that But Bakar is in the evening as the sun dissipates. Come and move in on the city. So it completely makes sense. The next one that we're going to hit pretty quickly is 2 Samuel 2:24. Something to always note, and this is one of the things when I was first going through all of these passages, that when I would read all the surrounding text, this would stick out to me. And not sometimes you don't have to read the surrounding text. You can see it right in the very same verse. And I'll point that out, but there's something else we're just going to pay attention to a few verses later that'll help clarify. In 2 Samuel 2:24, let's say in English, this is there was a serious issue that arose between Saul's captain Abner and David's captain, which, man, I would love to talk about David's captain, Joab. And the issue that arose between them is they had a sort of battle or contest of sorts at one place. And it would appear that Job's army was overcoming Abner's. So Abner fled, and one of Job's brothers followed after him. Which, when you read the whole picture and you understand that they were, especially David, was far more honorable in war, especially with his own brethren. And Job's family, Joab and his family, his brothers, they were, what else do I'm trying to think of the right word. If anyone has known like a family with a lot of brothers and they're all assholes, that was Joab and his brothers in a nutshell. There's no other way for me to really put it. So one of his brothers is following Abner, and he's just retreating. I don't think there was any good reason for him to be following him after that, that retreat. And Abner kept telling him, if you keep following me, I'm going to do something about it. Go on. He says, I don't want to, because him and Joab had a certain amount of respect, or at least Abner did, for one another. This was civilized. Yes, they were in conflict. Yes, they were in disagreement. Yes, people died when they clashed. It did happen, but there was not a disrespect for one another, at least from Abner to David and Joab. And he tells his brother, I'm sorry, but I gotta put this in, to go, stop following him, or something bad's gonna happen. And he wouldn't. And finally, Abner thrust his spear back and caught him just right and killed him. So now Joab finds this out, and he's now pursuing Abner. So he pursues him. The interesting thing is this. Now, Abner is fleeing in this verse. It's 2 Samuel 2:24. And it says that Joab and Abishai pursued after Abner, and the sun went down when they were come to the hill of Ammah that lies before Giah by the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. Something that I love about these verses, it's so interesting because you can see a direct contradiction in the verse if you look at the source text. So they say it's the sun going down, and the wording is shemash ba'eh. Okay, there's the ba. All right? And then a couple words later, I'm not kidding, because the next word is u'ema, so they, ba'u od gabot. They came to Gabot. So 2 words before, ba is the sun going away somewhere, going far away. Ba is behaving like tsa, just 2 words before. And then 2 words after, ba is behaving like it's supposed to. They came close to Gabot. It's in the same verse. Okay, so it's just so brazen. That's why I laugh. It's amazing. You can look at this verse and you can see that we've got ba and we've got ba, and they're literally 2 words apart. They're 2 words apart, and they get away with this crap. Oh, how far have we fallen? Okay, so look. Sorry. And then just a couple verses later, it does say that that Abner was traveling all night. Oh, maybe Ba-Eshemash is the sun going down. But it's not. It's not. Joab had basically makes a statement to him, like 1 or 2 verses, it's true, 2 verses later about Bakar, and they translate that as morning, obviously, and it has something to do with the men following him and all that. And again, the language it's used, like there's 6 or 8 words just in that passage alone that are, if you check them, they have all kinds of different ways they're translated. It's freaking ridiculous, man. I don't know how people can take themselves seriously who do singular word studies. It cracks me up. It cracks me up because it's insane. It's nuts. Because if you spend enough time with these words and you see how many different ways that even one entry into Strong's is translated, and how most of the time all of those different ways can't possibly be synonyms. And then you see, I've got a verse, this verse has got 20 words in it. And out of these 20 words, I know at least 10 of them are crazy. But I'm pretty sure I can come to a solid conclusion about this one. If I don't laugh, I'll cry. Or I'll yell, I don't know. But the thing is, so yeah, I mean, it does say in verse 27 that Abner went all night, and it's Lile, and so it's pretty concrete, right? So does that mean Booker? I would think it actually means far more like Booker is evening. The word Booker is used by Joab in a statement that he's making to Abner. They translate it as morning. And it's a real crappy translation too. All right. But if we look at the fact that, all right, when he came to this place, the Shemash was was coming. And then the next verse says that he gathered all the men there where he had come to. Obviously, he came to a place that was relatively secure from all the forces of Joab, at least for a time. And he gathered all the men together of Benjamin that he could while he was there at that place. And That would probably take a minute. That could take all day. So then it makes sense that a few verses later, and it says, and they traveled all through the night to another place. Makes perfect sense. Okay, we'll do the next verse. And the next one's the next chapter. 2 Samuel and 3 and 35 is the verse. And this is actually David mourning over Abner, because Joab, being the a-hole he was, and he was. And don't worry, he got his in the end, just after he did a lot of damage. David had a lot of respect, actually, for Abner. And as much as David did do a lot of killing himself in war and battle with the enemies of Israel, David took no pleasure whatsoever in the death of his own people, and he respected Abner, and he was mourning for Abner. Now in English, 2 Samuel 3:35 says, and when all the people came to cause David to eat meat while it was yet day, David sware, saying, so do God to me, and more also, if I taste bread or aught else, till the sun be down. All right, I'm going to try to stop myself from laughing here. This verse does the same thing as the last verse we saw. The verse actually starts out with, Uyiba kol eom, and the people came. The people came to David, the same exact root, Uyiba, people came to David. It is the same root as what we see with son, because son's in here, Eshemash, because it says Bua Eshemash, but it's, I guess, it's the magic word, and when it appears with the son, it's going away. It's not coming near. In the same verse, again, in the same verse. So the thing to note about this verse is, first off, and this, well, not first off, but this is gigantic. I mean, besides the fact that I just mentioned how they completely use ba in the opposite way in this verse. So what they say, they come to Dud, D-U-D, his name. So in Chronicles, it's spelled often D-U-Y-D, Duid. But all through 1st and 2nd Samuel, it's just Dud, D-U-D. Sorry, man, he was the dude. It says they came to convince him to eat. All right, and the next couple of words, they're really telling, because it's bu'aud ayum. They came to convince him. They came in, to convince him to eat until the day, but they change it. They change it to while it is yet day. But it says they come to get him to eat until it's day. And then he swears, may there, some way of saying, may Aliam do something, terrible to me if I should eat before, what? The sun comes up. Now, it's interesting about that sun coming up, and a number of times that we're going to see verses where they mistranslate ba eshemash and make it sundown, but it's somebody who is actually fasting until ba eshemash. And what's even more interesting about this, if you actually translate it consistently, and ba eshemash means the sun coming, or sunrise, if you want to call it rise. The interesting thing about that is there is a thing that happens all around the world to almost everyone when the sun comes. It doesn't happen to them. It's something that they do when the sun comes up. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called breakfast. And it's made up of, it's a compound word. It's made up of 2 words, break and fast. So it's pretty strange that there would be a number of verses we would encounter where they would translate that the sun was going down and they broke their fast. When, of course, if you translate ba consistently, it would be the sun coming up and then they broke their fast. Like a lot of people I know of do at breakfast. Just kind of interesting note there. Because I think we're going to actually see that really soon. Maybe not. There were We'll definitely see it when we go through verses having to do with Beker and Oreb and how they are misappropriated. We'll see some of those for sure. Because they'll typically tell you, as I've said, and I do repeat these things over and over and over because, after doing these sort of deep studies for years, you get very out of touch with how unfamiliar a lot of people may be with the material. And so one of the things that a lot of this repetition does, I hope, is helps that, so if you're going along and you're listening to a lot of body of information, if I keep repeating these things, then it's just really going to stick a lot better. So anyways, the next verse concerning the sun and descriptions of the sun is found in 2 Samuel. We've jumped all the way up to 2 Samuel 23 and verse 4. Well, actually, no, we were in 2 Samuel. Anyways, still in 2 Samuel. This is a verse where it's really good to pay attention to, for one thing, the context. Because, well, some of the words in this verse are translated a little strangely, as is the sort of syntax of the grammar. But what we see is it says in the first verse it says this. And now this is right after a lengthy psalm of David's that's recorded in chapter 22. And then in 23:1 it says, "Now these be the last words of David. David, the son of Jesse, said," and then he goes on. It's about 6 or 7 verses of a psalm. The biggest problem I have with this whole passage is, besides the fact, that this part with the sun is mistranslated, is it says, "These be the last words of David." And then it goes on to say, it gives his mighty men, and then it gives the account of him numbering the people with Joab and all of that. It's kind of weird for continuity's sake to say these were his last words and then go on to say other things he did. I think what actually is being said is that was his final psalm that he wrote, because David wrote so many psalms. And it was actually just given the last psalm that he wrote. Now, this could actually take it out of chronological order. If the one writing it down said this was the last psalm that he wrote. Now, if you look at it in context, and I'll have to give you the English first, and show you how they translated it, and then explain why it's better translated the other way. In 2 Samuel 23, verse 4, it is translated, "And he shall be," is in gray, "and he shall be as the light of the morning, when the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after rain." The first huge red flag is just how many gray italics words are in this verse, because they're all indicating to you that these words we can't in any way justify in the source wording. We can't justify this whatsoever, but we're putting this in to help it. If we read it without these, it would sound a little bit more like in English, without the gray italics. "And as the light of the morning, the sun riseth, a morning without clouds, the tender grass out of the earth by clear shining after rain." Yeah, that makes sense. So, context, really super important. Now, he's talking in this a bit about really the promise that Yahweh had made to him, that he would have a descendant ruling forever. And so it's important when you keep in mind the language that he's using. You see, the very next verse, I'll give it to you in English. "Although my house be not so with God, out of favor, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all and sure for all my salvation and all desire, although he make it not to grow." I'm trying to avoid these the gray italicized words because they're all over the place. Now, they say, of course, that they do that to help the flow of the text, but I don't believe that for a second. Now, what we're seeing is, poetically, It is. It's very. It's a very good strategy when you're writing verse, or even if you're making, let's say, a presentation. You're arguing something to show a similarity from one thing to the next. To say something quite similar in one way and then the next. And sometimes you can do the first way very poetically and the next way that you're stating the same thing very literally. So that's what we find in the next verse to the verse in question. He's saying, though he would be out of favor for some things he's done, specifically the whole matter with Uriah and Bathsheba and all that. And other things. I mean, David died. He died a man that had guilt about things he'd done. Because even though he did make mistakes, and I mean, big ones, he was always very conscious of the mistakes that he made. So he's saying in 35, even though he be out of favor, or his house be out of favor. And we could go through the source wording of this, but I can tell you that's the basic gist of it. He's saying even though he would be out of favor, there is yet still that everlasting covenant, so he can find hope in that. Even if things are dark with him and his house, he has hope in the fact that Yahweh made an everlasting covenant with him and his house. So the verse just preceding that we heard, where they're trying to tell us that he was saying, and as the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds as the tender grass springing out of the earth, right? Okay. Well, for one thing, this is, and again, if this is his last psalm, or as they say, the last words of David, and I don't know if that's true or not. If so, it is a bit out of, it would seem a bit out of chronological order just because we see a couple more things done by him after that. But now, if we would translate it a bit more consistently, what we would come to is, and as the light of evening dissipates, the evening sun doesn't halt the sprouting of grass from the land. And that's more mechanical, but I tried to leave these as mechanical as possible. I even smoothed that over just a little bit as I read it because it looks clunky mechanically. Or it sounds clunky. So if you think that he said in that verse, and as the light of evening dissipates, so it's Yezerah, which they're translating as rising. The light of the evening dissipates or scatters the sun, the evening sun, doesn't halt the sprouting grass from the land. And even in the text, you'll even see La Obut Manage. And he can absolutely be saying the clouds, the thick covering Obut, would not halt the sprouting of grass from the land. Which, I always forget the words that I want to say. The message between verse 4 and verse 5 then are far more consistent. He's saying one thing quite poetically, and then he's saying something more literally from the one to the next. All right, so next verse. Okay, this next one has a parallel. It's found in 1 Kings 22 and 36, and its parallel is to Chronicles 18:34. So we have both of those accounts. They are both worded very similarly. And this is a battle that Ahab goes to with Aram. And as we go along in the Old Testament, oftentimes the passages and the language get a little more subtle, and it's a lot easier, I think, in a lot of respects for these translators to have fooled with the text, and we see that a lot as the narrative of the Bible progresses. And it's especially evident like in the prophets, because they fool with those passages without end. And it's very simple for them by that. Nobody out there who has spent any kind of time reading the Bible, or especially the prophets, can say that there are not. You start reading the prophets like you'll read a major prophet, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, a lengthy prophet. You don't even need to read a lengthy prophet. You could read a small book like Amos, or, Hezekiah is kind of small. It's like medium length. Daniel, You read it, you read these passages of prophecy and you go, what? What did he say? Huh? What does that mean? I don't even know it. Is that a real sentence? Is that actually saying something? Because I don't get it. That's what I say. So that's why it's important when we look at any of these passages, especially as we progress through the Old Testament, to keep in mind, always keep in mind, that we have these concretes, that we have that absolute concrete of Ba and how Ba acts. As a word, as a concept, as a verb, how Ba always acts. We always have that concrete with Ba. Always have that concrete with Ba. And though Zerah doesn't have as many occurrences as Ba does, we did look at the overwhelming amount of its cognates, the other verses that we can find Zerah in, and how it does look far more like dispersing and scattering than rising. So we have those things. So we do have the concrete of day and night that we can always use as a sort of an anchor point that we can extrapolate from. So Ahab goes to battle with Aram, and Ahab is told just earlier in this chapter, actually, before he leaves for the battle, because he's going to go to battle with Aram and he's taking the king of Judah with him. And they want some reassurance. I got to do this real quick. I know it's a little something extra, but it does actually kind of relate to what we're going to look at. It does. Specifically, sort of one of the words that we have to look at in the verse that has the sun. Okay? So, they're told by their false prophets that the battle's going to go really well. and Ahab, as corrupt as he had become over his reign and time of being king, and with all the bad influence that his wife Jezebel was, who was from another people. She wasn't an Israelite. She was from she was a Sidonian. Anyways, he knows enough to know that he's a little nervous about this battle. And he's just like, I'm pretty sure my false prophets are telling me what I want to hear. Anyways, the king of Judah says, are there any other prophets? Because even he was kind of smelling the BS. He says, there's this one. He says, I hate this guy. He says, I hate this guy. Every time he comes, he tells me stuff I don't want to hear. Can't stand him. And he says, well, maybe we should have him come. Now, the reason I'm going to read a little bit, it does have to do with wording in the verse that we're looking at, but it also has a lot to do with the idea, look, let's just be honest. I've lived with a wife who has been critical of my actions for about the entire time that we've been married. And I'll bet there's a lot of women out there that are like that with their husbands in a lot of ways. And again, I'm not MGTOW, I'm not a misogynist, but there's a problem we have as a people. There are problems that our women have in the way they behave, and there are big problems with the way our men behave. Okay, I'm absolutely not one of these people that just points the finger at women. Our problems come from women. Our problems come from us. They come from us. Okay, but I'm just telling you, wife, it wouldn't matter how right I am about something. There would always be something to pick out concerning the way I said something, if I was using vulgar language. And sometimes vulgar language is appropriate, especially when we're talking about vulgar people doing vulgar things. Sometimes the impact is just not as strong without the vulgar language. And I want to give you an example of how the prophets of Yahweh were not these sort of proper, proper high-minded holy people. They were righteous. They were righteous. They were obedient. Sometimes they weren't. We see some prophets that weren't. more than just Balaam. But I want to give you just an example of how sarcastic a prophet could be. Because you don't have to be, you don't have to be holy in the sense of the way that society thinks. Society, they go around churches. These churches run around thinking that they're good folks because they don't say the F word. I kid you not. They literally think that it makes them very good and very high-minded, very proper, that they don't cuss. They don't use sarcasm, how low-minded, to be so sarcastic. And they've got everything all backwards. So now listen, this prophet that they transliterate as Micaiah, it says, so he came to the king, and the king said unto him, Micaiah, shall we go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we forbear? And he answered him, go and prosper, for Yahweh shall deliver it into the hand of the king. Sorry, I can't do that without And the king said to him, how many times shall I adjure you that you tell me nothing but that which is true? King Ahab, listen, the guy is so corrupt, but he knows. He knows the one guy in his kingdom that's going to tell him the truth, which is usually completely different than what his prophets, his lying prophets that he surrounds himself with. That'll just tell him whatever he wants to hear. He says, how many times have I told you, Micaiah? I'm sorry, but I'm trying to put myself there because it would just be killing me to keep a straight face. Because I can just see Micaiah coming in and he's probably irritated because he's stood before Ahab so many times already and told him the truth, and Ahab never listens. Obviously, Ahab never listens. So when he calls him in this time, he tells him, oh yes, you should go up against Ramoth Gilead, and Yahweh will deliver them into your hands, O king. And I can just imagine how sarcastic he said it. Because this guy, for one thing, he's not afraid of this king. And this king was a very, very powerful king, Ahab. Ahab was one of the most powerful kings that the northern kingdom ever had. Bar none. Bar none. And he's not afraid of him. And I can just imagine how he says this to him. Go and prosper, for Yahweh shall deliver it into the hand of the king. I mean, maybe he was struggling to keep a straight face when he said that to him. And he says to him, how many times have I told you? How many times have I told you to tell me nothing but the truth? And because the guy, he's making a point by lying to him. He's making a point to this king. The point is, this king doesn't want to hear what Yahweh has to say. This king only wants to hear lies. So when he comes in, the first thing out of his mouth is a lie. And then he goes on to tell him that he saw a vision. And, he may be really telling him that in, real tongue in cheek. He says he saw a vision and there were spirits standing all around the throne of Yahweh. And he says, and Yahweh asks a question to his spirits, who will go and be a lying spirit in the mouth of Ahab's prophets and convince him to go up to Ramoth Gilead to get himself killed? And he says, this one said this and that one said that. And then finally one volunteered. He said, I will go and be a lying spirit in the mouth of Ahab's prophets. And Yahweh says, you shall go and you shall prevail. So go forth and do. And then in 23, now therefore, behold, Yahweh has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets. And Yahweh has spoken evil concerning you. That's what Micaiah is saying to Ahab. Okay. And then there's a few more verses. Not as important, but what is important is Micaiah assured him that he was going to go up to Ramoth Gilead and be killed. He told him, if you go up there, you're going to die. For sure. So to reward him, Ahab says, put him in prison and feed him just bread and water. It says bread and water of affliction, probably underfeeding him. Okay. He says, until I return in peace. Micaiah says, if you return at all in peace, then Yahweh has not spoken by me. All right. So the verse is in question. So Ahab and the king of Judah, they go up to Ramoth Gilead. Now, it's actually Ramoth Galod. It was the region that two of the tribes occupied, and another one actually wasn't too far from it. The Galod was a really large, hilly region. And so they had taken this very significant town, Ramoth, in Galod. Aram did. Aram was a close sort of northern to north. I don't even want to say eastern, western country and territory, and I think they stretched to the west quite a bit because of some other verses and how it's described land that Reuben took and so on and so forth. Okay, so they fight, and the narrative basically says like an archer drew his bow at a chance and shot. And the arrow hit Ahab kind of just right. Now the thing is, he doesn't die at that point. It wasn't an immediate kill shot. And what happens is that he ends up coming back to his camp because never mind. There's a different prophecy. I was going to mix it with the one about Jezebel. It's a different one. I'm sorry. So anyways, he does come back to his camp, and the narrative in English gives a time when he dies. And then here in 1 Kings 22:36, it says, and there went a proclamation throughout the host about the going down of the sun, saying every man to his city and every man to his country. Okay, well, the first thing about all of that is this. We have overwhelming concrete examples that Ba is not going, Ba would not be setting, Ba is coming. And that's the word used in here. So the wording is Ui Ober Erane B'Mahane Kaba Eshamash. So Ui Ober and went over or crossed. And then the word is Erane. Now, Erane is translated a lot in a sense as like word, like not like an announcement. That would be a different word. Well, like Chinese telephone. It went from person to person to person to person. It kind of spread through the camp. Okay, and this is Keba Eshamash. So keeping it consistent. I don't know what word I was going to say. Consistent. We would have as the sun came. To say Aish al Oiru u Aishal Aretsu. And so as to say that the word, basically, the word was spreading. It was spreading that the king had just perished throughout the camp. And that was the word, basically, our king has perished. So every man back to his city and back to his land. So the only two things that we want to look at is first off that, the preceding verse. There is a phrase here which includes the word day. And I want to make that clear because I've talked to you so much about how hour as in light and day. The day is the time of light and hashak or night, lile, night is the time of hashak, darkness. Because in the preceding verse it says, Utaole melhame beyum ewa. And then it goes on to another statement. What this statement is saying is that the battle raged over the entire day. It's giving you an overall statement that the battle was essentially hot and severe throughout the entire day. Now that statement is done, and then it goes on to say, U'emelech ma'obad mabarakeh naka aram. And it's giving us another statement that the king, this is after he had been hit by this chance arrow, still stayed up in his chariot throughout. this is, in a sense, sort of a retrospective, but then it goes on to say after that, Be'orab uyitzak dam emake al hik erekab. So the uyamat is die. Be'oreb. And then uyitzak, they're saying in the blood, his blood ran from his rakab, which they always say is chariot. Vehicle. Whatever sort of vehicle they would have used, that he used. All right. So the thing is about Be'oreb, they try to tell us that's evening. Now, if they translate Oreb as evening and they translate Ba as the sun going down, then they're all fine and good. And somebody could point to the fact that earlier it said that the battle continued throughout the day. Aha! The battle continued throughout the day. So when we see Oreb, that's evening. And Ba Eshemash, that's the sun setting. However, it doesn't take it doesn't tell us how long it took for him to die, because it doesn't say it was a kill shot. It was a wounding shot. It was a wounding shot. And 2 Chronicles 18, the language word for word it's just so similar that we don't really have to make comparisons. You can take a look at it. But we do have really all the information we need here, and we can confirm it in 2 Chronicles 18 if we do so choose. So he tells whoever's driving this rakab, this vehicle he's in, or whatever it is, to turn away from the camp. Now, he doesn't say the camp of Aram. He doesn't say the camp of Israel and Judah. He says to turn away from the camp because he's wounded. Now, it does say this, though. This is interesting, that he stayed himself up in this rakab. Well, you have to think about this for a second. Now, if he was wounded really badly and he thought he needed care and he was just a weak, sort of cowardly guy, he would have told him to get back to camp so he could get medical attention. But he doesn't tell him to do that. He says, turn away from the camp. He's wounded. He doesn't tell him to go back to his camp and get him any care, because it does specifically say that he stayed himself in this rakab, even though he was wounded. And you have to consider that he could have stayed that way, even being wounded, for quite some time. And also, when the text says, it uses this word oreb, and the word oreb, actually, that occurs it occurs in verse 35. And what it'll say is, it'll say he died at evening. Well, first off, of course, if the sun is coming, that would make, of course, Oreb morning instead of evening. And he could have naturally died in the morning. And then the word spread through the camp at Ba Eshemash, at the coming of the sun. What's even more interesting is this. Even the men who translated the King James Bible, because I wanted to put day in there, so you saw it was in proximity, but somebody couldn't come along and say, oh, well, it was day, so we know that when we see this Oreb, that means in the evening. No, that is simply just a statement in and of itself, that the battle during the day was intense all day. And we know from many, 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 many verses that when there is war, when there is battle, it will oftentimes just continue through the day, through the night. They oftentimes did not just take a break, unless both sides would agree to take a break. If there was no winning, because sometimes a battle would go on for quite a long time before one side prevailed over the other. So even though there's a few words in here that might be a little confusing, that you could go one way or another with, the 2 words that are extremely concrete, one is yom, because we know that yom is light, so it is daylight during yom. The second is ba, and we know that whatever appears with ba, that means it is coming near to the other thing, or simply the implied object or subject. And we also know that statement that the battle stayed strong in the day. And it even ends with the Eowa. So it is telling us in a little encapsulation that there was a very intense battle throughout the day. And given the fact that it wasn't a severe kill wound, he could have stayed himself up throughout the night, died in the morning, and then the word goes out as the sun comes, as the morning is waxing on, because the morning waxes on until noon, and then the day wanes until dusk. And now that I've double-checked both occurrences of Oreb, I've decided not to compare that to the passage with the prophet. Because what I was going to do, I was going to point out the fact that Oreb is often actually used as surety, which is really interesting too, because if Oreb was indeed morning instead of evening, as they usually make it out, kind of reminds me of something like, it's as sure as the sunrise. I was going to point it out in the fact that the prophet Micaiah assured him that he would die. But interestingly enough, and this is what's great about having parallel passages, is that the two are actually stated with a slight difference. This doesn't have anything to bear on what I just said. The reason I'm going over this is because I'm not going to go back and erase what I said about Micaiah. And I know it was a rabbit trail, but it was really important to try to illustrate a little bit just the way that uptight people behave and how they try to put upon us certain types of morals that are sort of their own projections of what they think ought to be good or moral or whatever else. But then we see from the Bible the way that prophets often acted. These are men who were righteous before Yahweh. So I'm going to keep that in there. But the two passages are slightly different. The one says in 1 Kings that concerning Ahab, Yamat Be'oreb, in the morning. And the other says that he stayed himself up, Nekeh, so against Aram, Od et Oreb. Keeping in mind that before that we have, this is again a good example of how two different statements are combined in one verse. Because the first separate statement is, and this is just reading from 2 Chronicles 18:34, Uta'ol emelhameh be-iyum e'ewa. The battle dominated that entire day. And then that statement is done. That covers the entire day. That covers the entire time of light. The battle was consistent and stayed heavy for the entire day. And then we move on to another statement. But they combine both statements in a verse to give you the idea that the second statement is in direct relationship to the first instead of being in addition. So if we separated those, like bizarrely enough, the King James did. It separated it, at least with a colon, signaling to us that they are, in fact, separate statements. Because in 2 Chronicles 18:34, it goes on to tell us, Umelech is Yisrael, Eya, Ma'omid, but is he in this chariot? Yes. But Merakab. The funny thing is the way that is stated. The way it's stated. Rakabe. Sorry. It's Rakabe. It's what they say chariot. But it has an M at the front of it, which makes it even more interesting. Because it makes me think that by the way that it's being said, it even more accentuates that he was determined to stay himself, and I hate to use the term chariot, as a charioteer, or at least in whatever this vehicle is, against Aram, unto, because this is as long as he could make it. He literally stayed up, so we're not talking about a coward, we're not talking about somebody weak. And it may well be that when he was shot, the words of Micaiah rung in his ears. And he knew he was going to die. He knew when he got shot that Micaiah was right. And so instead of having him go back to the camp and get him some kind of medical help to try to fix him or whatever else, he decided to stay himself up in the vehicle he was in. And he stayed up, probably to provide, for one thing, moral support for his army, to keep himself stayed up. And it does say he stood, he remained standing until the Oreb, which they want to say is evening. Uyamat la'ot bua ashamash. And here's the problem. You can't make it work if you try to say that this was happening during the day, because bua is concrete as well. Our problem comes in with Oreb here and the fact that two statements are smashed together. Yum is strong, bua is strong. Oreb is not. So if we know that the battle was heavy during the day, and we know that later it says that he died as the sun came, which in the parallel passage in 1 Kings said the message went out over the camp as bua eshamash, then all we have a problem with in between is Oreb. If we have a concrete here at the front, a concrete here at the back, we know the battle was heavy during the day, but we know he died when the sun came. Our only problem is Oreb. And when we look at the word comparisons I did in modern language with morning and evening and what I found out there, you'll see why that is not a problem. So I'm sorry, I did stay on that subject quite a long time. I'll go on to the next. So then we're going to encounter a lot more passages from that 1 Kings forward, where it's really just a matter of perspective, depending on what we're plugging in. Are we plugging day in? Are we plugging night in? And so on and so forth. They're not all that conclusive until we get to Psalm 50 and verse 1. Now, this is another one that has zera in it, or mazera. All right, so in the English, Psalm 50 and verse 1 reads like this. The mighty God, even the Lord, hath spoken, and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. That's how it reads. That's interesting. It's really interesting because what we have in here, for one thing, we have uyikara aretz. Okay, so Deber is a matter, and uyikara cry, basically looking at something like petitioning and calling, or presenting matters and calling, the eretz. So to sort of put that together in a little bit better way based on consistency of word translation and grammar, when we look at the context of this psalm, we see from the verses that follow that they're talking about Yahweh once again shining forth in the land. So when we see it in their translation, they say, the mighty God, he has spoken and called to the earth from the rising sun to the going down thereof. But then we look at the source text and we see ma-zamur, wickedness, la-asap, to end, al, towards, alayim, God, Yahweh. The wickedness is to end towards alayim Yahweh. Debar u yikara aretz, the land makes petition. Mamazara shamash od mabua. So if we translated that consistently, it would say the land petitions and calls from the scattering sun until it comes. What I would pose to you, well, I've talked to a lot of people. Let's just say this. If you've talked to a lot of people, you've heard a lot of people, let's say, describing the time in which they pray, the hours when they have the solitude for praying and making petitions. Those times are overwhelmingly at night, across the board. They're overwhelmingly at night. And so it does follow, I believe, far better to say that the cries and petitions of the land are from the sun setting unto the sun rising. And I don't want to make a huge point out of that because it's one verse in a larger psalm. You can look at the whole context. And the one thing you can see is that once again, they translate it poorly, and they do have to change its syntax in order to make that work. They add a lot of words to it to make it work. When if they just would stay consistent, you might look at that and you might say, well, you could probably look at it and say, let's see, wickedness to end against Alim Yahweh, the land it petitions and calls from sunrise to sunset. Well, that would work too, right? And it would. It would work just in a sense of being grammatically okay, right? No big deal. Except for the fact, in 46 years, I have been to prayer meetings, heard people talk, heard messages from preachers, heard messages from people, just people talking about their prayer life, been in prayer groups. And I'm telling you, the overwhelming amount of prayers and crying, in their case, to God, as they would put it, happens in the evening, without a doubt. Now, that's not to say nobody does during the day. Plenty do during the day. Just the overwhelming amount tend to happen at night. Another one in the Psalms I find interesting is Psalms 104:19. In English, it says, He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows his going down. And of course, this is going to be another passage where the sun is used with mabua. Okay. It's a real short little verse. It just says, Oshe yira le mu'odim shamash yedo mabua'u. The really interesting thing about this passage is when you see mu'odim, what they're saying is Oshe makes yira moon, la mu'odim appointments. The moon establishes appointments or appointed times, mu'odim. And that's really what mu'od is appointed times. Okay, we use the moon for establishing appointed times. And then it goes on just to say, Shamash Yedo Mabua'u. The sun is establishing, let's say it knows, it's using Yedo, Mabua'u. If we look at a consistency of two types of phrases back to back and how they actually complement each other, if the moon establishes appointments by what phase it's in and so on and so forth, we can look at these three words having to do with the sun in a very similar fashion. And the sun coming up is far more, forget about everything that you've been told about Boker and Oreb being morning and evening in the Bible. Because if they've been reversed, we don't start the new day in the evening. We start the new day in the morning. The obvious start of a new day is in the morning. Even though in the West, they say at midnight is the new day and so on and so forth. It's a real obvious thing. If you lived apart from this modern thought that we've had imposed upon us, you would know that the new day starts in the morning. You would know that. Instinctually, you would know that. And each new day, at the coming of the sun, is the start of a new day, essentially an appointment. And the sun rising as a new day is a new appointment. The two do complement each other if you understand that Ba is coming, and as the moon establishes appointed times and seasons, the sun knows it's coming. It's always consistent every day. And when the sun comes, it is a new day. It is not a new day at sunset. It is a new day at sunrise. The next one, Psalm 113:3, it's another one of those psalms where you could just say subjectively, well, that could be sunrise or it could be sunset, and that's quite true. However, again, we know that Mabua is concrete, and we've seen an overwhelming amount of evidence for what Mazara is. In the English, it says that the psalmist, which this one is likely David as well, it says that the psalmist says, from the rising sun until its setting, I will praise the name of Yahweh. And then you could just plug in the opposites and say, from the dissipating sun until its entering, I will praise the name of Yahweh. So you could plug in either, and I guess anyone could subjectively just come along and say, well, either one works just fine. And that's true. However, we know that a great majority of David's psalms he actually wrote when he was on the run from Saul, when he was on the run from many people, times that he spent alone, time that he spent suffering, time that he spent afraid in the night. And I would think anyone who has been through more difficult times knows that the night is often the most difficult time of unsurety. And it is the time in which a lot of bad things happen to people in the night. I would just pose to you that knowing the times that David had in which he wrote most of his psalms, that I think there is a little bit more weight just on the idea. Forget the fact that we're translating things consistently at this point. But even if somebody could say, well, you could switch those subjectively, you could. But we do know that David spent a great deal of time of lowness of the soul and unsurety and times afraid at night. I mean, one of the most popular psalms of David, it was, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death and darkness and night, makes a lot of sense that when he was on his own, when he was running for his life for a long time, he did this. He did this for a very long time, for years, that he would praise Yahweh from the going down of the sun until its coming up. At night, in the dark, when most evil things happen to people, in the night, in the dark. Another really interesting one is how they change Isaiah 60:20. In English, Isaiah 60:20 says, Thy sun shall no more go down, neither shall thy moon withdraw itself. For Yahweh shall be thine everlasting light, and the days of thy mourning shall be ended. But they said, Lord. In context, however, it is saying, we'll just do one verse before, Isaiah 60:19, the sun shall no more light, the sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee. But the Lord, Yahweh, shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory. So that's the preceding verse to the one that they've just translated in that way. But the actual language just says La Yebua. So after you see that the prophet is saying that no more will you need the sun to light your way or the moon to guide you, okay? And then the next verse says La Yebua O'ud Shamashak U Yirahak. That's the first statement. All right. And then the next statement is La Iyasap ki Yahweh Yahweh lak. That's a different statement. So we'll start with that first statement. And we really don't have to end with the rest of it. Just that little bit right there. Knowing what the preceding verse says. So we've got the context. And then we've got La Yebua O'ud Shamashak U Yirahak. All the author is saying there is you will not need the witness of the sun and the moon. You will not come to the witness. O'ud is an appointed time of witnessing. La Yebua. Okay? You will not need the witness of your sun and your moon. That's what it's saying. If we see the verse before it, it's very clear. The sun shall no more be a light by the day, or brightness shall the moon give light unto the night. So it absolutely follows, and you don't need all of this text that they put in there to try to justify their swapping and inconsistency of use of terms. This next one is a real nasty, kind of again, one of those like shameless changing of so much wording in a verse to make their system work. Jeremiah 15:9 in English says, She that hath borne 7 languisheth. She hath given up the ghost. Her son is gone down. While it was yet day, and they have to insert it was. While yet day, She hath been ashamed and confounded. They're separating that with colons. So at the end of day, there's a colon. She hath been ashamed and confounded, colon. And the residue of them will I deliver to the sword before their enemies, saith the Lord. That's how it's translated. If you look at the actual wording, the wording seems to imply these weakened children of the oaths sworn, and they lived for the coming son, in full witness of shameful days, bringing her own remnant to violence, I gift to their enemies, says Yahweh. Now, besides the fact that they really changed the grammar and the syntax of this verse, we have just in the midst of that, napashe ba'e shemashe be'od yumam. Really important. Napashe, essentially existing, ba'e shamashe. So if ba'e is the coming of, coming near of, as it is translated over 2,500 times, one thing coming near another, ba'e shamashe, the coming of the sun, we have the next two words that now make total sense. You don't have to split this up as they do, putting that colon in and making it separate statements. It's one statement. Ba'e shemashe ba'od yuman, in the witness of days. They're saying Ba'e shemashe, the coming sun, witnessing days. What is day? We have it from Genesis 1:5. Light. Day is light. Darkness, hashak lile, lile night. Ba'e shemashe ba'od yumam. Clearly see, Ba'e shemashe would be the coming sun because of the witness of the days. Days. Light is day. Our light is day. Just to give you another example of what lengths they have to go to change all of these verses, because when they want to change it fundamentally in the earlier books of the Bible, then they have to often resort to all kinds of crazy and inconsistent translations as they get further and further and further along in the Old Testament to keep up that charade, to make it keep working. Their translations have to get more and more inconsistent and ridiculous. Now this one I love because of the illustration of how ba or bua should be used consistently. And it's a verse that sun appears in. Sun doesn't occur with bua or I'm sorry, or zera, but it does occur in here along with bua. And this is a great illustration of how they do it inconsistently every time they apply bua, ba'e, ba to going down of the sun. Because in this verse, it's Joel 3:4, it's pretty well known by a lot of people who misappropriate it to bad interpretation of prophecy, but it says, Eshamash, epak, lahashak, u ayira, ladam, lapani, bua, iyum, Yahweh. Egadul, it's the great. Now here's what's important. This is that really well-known verse where it says the sun would be darkened, and they say and the moon turned to blood, though it could have a lot to do with its stopping, because we've got ladam. And I showed you how doom was used in Joshua when he asked the sun and moon to stay still. But I won't rabbit trail into that. The big important part here is it says lapani, which is before, lapani bua iyum Yahweh. What is that? Before the coming of the day of the Lord. But they always want to apply bua, ba, ba'e, mabua, all of these variations of ba, they want to apply to the sun going away or setting. But here it's very obvious. Before the coming of Yum Yahweh, bua. There it is again, consistently, coming. That's how you can know every time you see ba, bua, what is it? What did I say? It's H930, bua. Always coming. You see Bua with sun, that means the sun is coming. And that changes directions. It changes where we thought was east to west, just as I showed at the end of the last episode. That puts the Great Sea not to the west. It puts the Great Sea to the east. It means that days don't start at sundown like the Jews start their days, tell us that the days and the feasts and everything start at sundown. That means the days start at sunrise, like they obviously do. This means everything is far more harmonious in language. Did I point out yesterday that in that same verse of Genesis 1:5, where it defines Yom as the time of light and Lile, night, as the time of darkness, you can't look at a day like a 24-hour period like we do today. Today, we would say a day, and we would be referring to a 24-hour period, starting at midnight and going to midnight. And we would simply include the time of darkness in the day. We would call the whole thing a day, right? These are terms that have been imposed upon us. This is not what the Bible says. The Bible says the time of light, aur, is day. The time of hashak, darkness, is night. Then in that same verse, at the end of that same verse, it says, U oreb, U eboker, yum, yahad, or is it hadat, yahad. And what they translated is, and the evening and the morning were one day. How can that be? In the same verse, it just says he called the light day. And then the evening and the morning, we know that from the evening to the morning is darkness. The evening and the morning are not day. So it cannot possibly be saying in the evening and the morning, we're day 1, we're day 2, we're day 3, we're day 4. But, and the morning and the evening, which is the time when all the work that he did was done in the day, during the light. You see how that now starts to harmonize, where before it wasn't harmonious. All right, so I think we only have like 1 or 2 more verses that I'm going to illustrate the way that modern languages back up the fact that they have swapped morning and evening as far as boker and oreb and what they are. And then I will wrap this episode up. Amos 8:9 is worth pointing out as well. Here in Amos 8:9 in English, it says, And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord God, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day. Yeah, that's what the English says. Look at the source language, and mechanically what it would say is, and be in day the same, implore my Lord Yahweh. So he's saying this is Nam, so thus says. It would be the same in that day. And the comings of the sun will be covered, and darkness to the land in daylight. You see, now we have the doubling up of an idea, and they are entirely harmonious when we apply ba as in coming, so sunrise. The sunrise would be covered, but tsarim. U ahashakti, and the darkness to the land in yum, in daylight. Oh, and actually it says in yum aur, in the light of day. It's 2 phrases saying the same thing in a different way, but they have to change it to make it work in the English translations. This next one I really like because of what it illustrates, and it helps us understand the value of spending time observing the world around us, because then we can be far better judges of what the Bible is indeed telling us is going on. It's in Jonah. It's Jonah 4:8. This is after Jonah has gone through the city of Nineveh, not Nineveh, but yeah, sure, Nineveh. And he cried out. He really wanted to see Nineveh destroyed. And of course, he knew that probably wasn't going to happen. And he's so upset about this, he camps out. He goes, he's done with what Yahweh had a great sea creature swallow him and keep him inside of it for 3 days for not doing. He did it. But he's still not happy about it. And he wants to see Asher destroyed. I really, to tell you the truth, I really believe I understand where Jonah was coming from. Because by this time, Asher had been very oppressive to Israel for some time. Of course he wanted to see them destroyed. He was tired. He was tired of them. He was tired of the war, the oppression that they brought. He did not like these people at all. I get it. So he's kind of holding out hope that maybe they won't repent and Yahweh will destroy the city. So he camps out outside it. Now, in the English, it says, "And it came to pass when the sun did arise, that God prepared a vehement east wind, and the sun beat upon the head of Jonah." Punishing, right? Beat upon his head. "That he fainted and wished himself to die. He said, it's better for me to die than to live." And this is where, before this, Aliim had already made a shade for him, and it says, I don't know how well this is all translated, that it said he prepared a worm that ate it, and now he didn't have anything to protect him from the harshness of the sun and all that. Okay. All right. Well, here's the deal with that, is that it does say, Uyei kezera eshemash. If we translate zera consistently, it would be at the scattering of the sun, so towards the evening. All right. And this would be one passage which, if we didn't know concretely that Ba is always the coming of, and that Zerah, not only are its cognates consistent in scattering, spreading, and not towards, but dissipating, scattering out away, dissipation of. We might have a problem with this. And we might say, well, it's obvious, that at the sunrise, Uyemen Aliim Ruch Kadim, he brought, it says, from Aliim himself was a harsh wind. Kadim is like it's an unpleasant, sort of a drying or harsh type of wind. I don't even know if we're talking about wind per se. Because actually wind, no matter if it was morning or evening, that wind would actually be not too bad, I think. Unless it was a hard wind that was in addition to the punishment of the sun causing him more distress, and if whatever it was wasn't just the leaves of a plant that was sheltering him. However, the important thing to take away from this is that anyone who has worked outside spent time out of doors, in the morning, before the sun comes up and as the sun rises, and then at the end of the day, as the sun is dissipating in the west. They know for a fact, not only does the setting sun look different than the rising sun, the setting sun is far more brutal feeling than the rising sun. The rising sun is quite pleasant, even on hot days. The rising sun is oftentimes far more pleasant. Because of the air, whatever it is, the rising sun, even in like the dog days of summer, is not as harsh as the setting sun. When the sun has gone to the west and beginning to spread out, it is still brutal and far more brutal than the morning sun is. So, just one more thing, as Forrest would say. Okay, so again, Micah 3:6. This one is really important because of the way they translate it as compared to what the words actually say. In Micah 3:6 in the English, "Therefore night shall be unto you, that ye shall not have vision, and it shall be dark unto you, that ye shall not divine. And the sun shall go down over the prophets, and the day shall be dark over them." Well, no, not quite. Because we know in here it's day, it's yom. Okay? And what is during the day? The day is light. Okay? That we know. So, and the sun shall go down over the prophets, and the day shall be dark over them. Well, if the sun was going down, then it wouldn't be day. That's what's important to notice here. Then if we look at the wording, the actual Hebrew If we look at the Jubru and then we have an OBRY translation, we can look right at these glyphs and we can see the wording says, "To be so night to all of you seers and dimness to you will penetrate." What he's essentially saying is that these false prophets will have nothing but night and darkness. And then he goes on to say, "U ba'e shamash ol anaba ayim." And though the sun rise over the prophets, U kadar oliam yum. Although the sun rise over the prophets, darkness will overshadow them in the day. Now it makes sense. Now it's consistent. I don't have to fool with the translation at all for that to be completely consistent. For him to say that the false prophets would have nothing but darkness and dimness, they would not see true visions. And he goes on to say that although the sun rise over them, they would have darkness over them in the light of day. Makes complete sense. Now, there are a couple of passages in Malachi that are important to look at. In Malachi chapter 1, verse 11, let's just say this. Look, Malachi is the last prophet in the Old Testament as far as the books go, but he is prophesying about the coming of the Messiah. Now, if you follow the chronology of prophecy, you would see that the great and terrible day of Yahweh would follow the coming of his Messiah. And he says to us back in Amos, "Do not long for the day of Yahweh, because the day of Yahweh is to you darkness and not light." The day of Yahweh, which would be the day of our scattering and our pain and tribulation for a great many, many years, centuries. The day of Yahweh is to you, Israel, darkness and not light. So in the context of this, because he does say earlier in verse 3, he's talking about the disobedience of his people. Your eyes will see, you'll say, Yahweh will be magnified from the borders of Israel, away from Israel. Now, in the English, Malachi 1:11 says, "For from the rising of the sun even to the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles," the Goyim, all the other nations. "In every place, incense shall be offered my name in a pure offering." Okay, when we look at it, in the source text, we see that it would consistently be from the scattering of the sun and until its coming. My name will be great in the nations. And all locales. I won't get into the rest of the verse. Because what he says in the rest of the verse, I disagree with the way they translate it, but it doesn't have great bearing on this. What does have great bearing on this is the fact that the day of Yahweh, Yom Yahweh, would be to Israel darkness and not light. So, from the scattering of the sun until its great coming, my name will be great in all the nations, in the locales where Israel will be scattered. Now we also have one more in Malachi, and that is Malachi 3:20. What's interesting about Malachi 3:20 is this. It's the fact that we see the word Zerah. That same word that they try to tell us is the sun rising. The rising of the sun, Zerah. We see Zerah in here. It is a passage with Shamash, but just like the passages where I told you how they completely translate Ba differently than they want to translate it when it appears with the sun, they do the same thing with Zerah in this passage. So in the English translations, this next verse is Malachi 4:2. In the Masoretico Critical Edition, and this is sometimes quite difficult when you have to look at these different editions, it's 3:20 in the Masoretico Critical. But if you're reading it in English, you want to reference it in English, it's Malachi 4:2. What's interesting about it is that, as I told you, this is one of the last prophecies concerning the Messiah, the last voice to come to Israel, who was still the remnant of Judah and some other tribes were still in the land. Then directly after that would be this Yom Yahweh, the day of Yahweh, which to Israel would be darkness and not light. Now, the preceding verse to the one that we're going to look at says, For behold, the day comes that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that comes shall burn them up, says the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. And then the way that they translate the next verse. They translate it as, But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise, with healing in its wings, and he shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. Okie dokie. Well, what it actually says is, it starts out with, and now remember what the last verse just said. The last verse is specifically talking about Yom Yahweh. And we have all throughout the prophets that Israel would be scattered in Yom Yahweh. That was part of the punishment. That was part of the whole thing prophesied with the day of Yahweh, Yom Yahweh. Now the next verse, the one in question, starts with U Zarahe Lakam. Yirai Shami Shamash. All right. Now this is really interesting. Maybe I should read it one more time. The English says, But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in its wings. But this starts out with U Zarahe Lakam. Yirai Shami Shamash. That word there, zera, is entirely separated in the context, in the grammar, from Shamash. And if it was translated consistently, it would say, and the scattering travelers who fear my name. The sun, straight and focused and and vibrant in their edges, and they would go forth and increase as fatlings from stalls. He's talking to those who he's scattered. It's Yom Yahweh. Zarahe, those who he's scattered, who fear his name. Shemi, my name. Son Tzadakeh. You could even say that what he's saying is, those who are scattered that fear his name will be as the righteous sun, and vibrant in their edges, and they would go forth and increase as fatlings from stalls. That makes complete sense if the Zerahe is those scattered, because he was going to scatter everyone, his people. He was going to scatter all of his people. All right, so there is a passage from Daniel. Now, this is in Aramaic. And as far as I'm concerned, biblical Aramaic is simply ad hoc OBRY with basically an Assyrian base to it. But we can still understand a lot of things from it because it does resemble OBRY in so many ways, in form and in a great deal of the vocabulary. Now, if I said 615, I was wrong because of the shift in the Masoretico-critical. In the English, it's 614. What it says there in English is, Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. This is really amazing to me. What is so amazing to me is this, that in the Aramaic portions of the Bible, they're still swapping out terms to make this work. It says Ma'oli Shamasha Eoah. Ma'oli Shamasha. Oli is something going up. This is the first time we'll actually see the term that looks like rising. And it's really interesting because of how dubious Aramaic is, and who I believe applied the Aramaic. It was all of those peoples that were moved into Shomron or Samaria by Asher, and then later more by Babel, that they would actually use a term like Oli in their source text for Shemashah, rising of the sun, instead of it coming near like the pure OBRY would say. But even in this, they translate it bass-ackwards from what Oli should be. Oli should be the going up, not the going down. The going up of the sun. He labored until Ma'oli, the going up of the sun, to try to deliver him. Why would that be? Because he was in there overnight. This is just another example of how everything has to be bass-ackwards for them to make everything work. Laboring through the night to deliver someone is nowhere near as impactful as somebody who had started out during the day when all the events transpired, who labored through the night until the sun came up to try to deliver someone. This is such a common thing if any sort of event occurs during the day, when the men of his court would be active, when they would present something to him during the day. If he labored until the sun went down, oh, that's nice. But he was very committed to trying to save Daniel. He liked Daniel quite a lot. And so he labored until, and the text literally says, Oli, which is always going up. Always, 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 always going up. Hopefully this serves as one more apt illustration of the way that they have to use opposites. And this is exactly what they do. This is exactly in line with their entire philosophy, how they approach everything. They invert everything. Everything. They invert everything. It is a rudimentary part of what makes up their being. Inverting everything. They invert everything. It's why when you see all of those old movies, or when you see a lot of these articles or whatever that they used, propaganda that they used on us in the West about Jews, how brutal and barbaric the Germans were, and the way they made the Germans look and the way they made the Jews look in a lot of their propaganda and in their movies and everything else, they would oftentimes, I kid you not, they would oftentimes use actual genetic Jews as the Germans and actual Germans in the pictures and movies they showed of Jews. I kid you not, that's exactly the case, because they invert everything. Now let me just take you through something very interesting that helped me in solidifying this whole idea of morning and evening, because that was the one hang-up. I found the whole the issue with Ba Eshemash and Zerah Eshemash, that was not as difficult because I word studied everything and I saw that there was, of course, that terrible problem. But then, of course, the thing that I had to deal with after that was the problem with them translating Boker as morning and Oreb as evening. And in addition, the fact that Boker is translated as various things. It's translated by them as morning. It's translated as a herd. It's translated as a matter to be looked into or inquiry made, seeking or inquiring. And Oreb is translated in a lot of ways besides just evening by them. It's translated evening, surety, covering, warp, so on and so forth. Like a lot of ways. There's a people called Oreb and Orebim. So what I decided to do, using Google Translate, I just typed into the English portion of it, morning. And then I went through and I selected all of the languages that I have seen in the vocabulary, in the word roots, in the grammar, and in the people themselves, the signs of Israel. So the languages that I compared morning to and evening to were Afrikaans, Bosnian, Bulgarian, Danish, Dutch, German, Icelandic, Irish, Latvian, Lithuanian, Luxembourgian, Norwegian, Scottish, Swedish, Ukrainian, Welsh, those languages. And what I did was I tracked the words that they gave me. And these are modern, okay? So if we go back a couple few hundred years, they could have been far closer to these things. A lot of these things, so I have a lot of old dictionaries and lexicons from these languages. A lot of these they are accurate, yet when you go back further, some of the words were different in their spelling, and oftentimes they get even closer than what I'm going to show you or tell you about right now. What I did was, when I put in morning, every time I would get the word in that respective language, I would mark in red what phonetic, like how many phonetic components in the translated word I got were like oreb for morning or oreb for evening. I would mark that with a certain color, red, and then I would mark how much they were like boker in blue. And then I would compare how many phonetic similarities there were in all of those various languages to morning or evening. And then I added them up just to kind of take a look at, well, how close phonetically would morning be? See, because they're saying boker is morning and they're saying oreb is evening. Okay, so when I did this on evening, which is supposed to be oreb, in the Bible, oreb is translated evening. What I got was, let's see, I'm going to have to go to the end here. All right, so the matches that I got for phonetic similarities to oreb for evening were, out of all of those languages that I just named, I got 65 phonetic matches. And I used a sort of scoring system. Let me just explain that to you real quick, okay? The way that the scoring system worked as I would go through this is the words with single letters that were close to correct word position, they got 5 points in the score. 2 consecutive letters, or just phonetic sounds, because there have been certain shifts. But if they had those consistent phonetic sounds, like if there was a V instead of a B, that still counted, because we know that's been a phonetic shift, or a D for a T. That counted. Vowels always counted. And these points, these scores, were applied consistently to both boker or oreb. All right? It wasn't weighted one side to the other, okay? So 2 consecutive phonetic letter or sounds got 20 points per occurrence. 3 consecutive letters got a score of 50 points. And then I would add them up. So when I tried to do evening, words that scored in the oreb camp added up to 65 points altogether. Words that scored closer to the boker side of this got 300 points. So a full 235 points more than oreb being evening. And that's really significant. Now, when I did this for boker, so I typed morning into the English blank, and then I compared all of those same languages and added up that score. For morning being boker, or these words having similarities to boker, it scored 15. For them having similarities to oreb, they scored 185. So 170 more points. So these weren't even close. They weren't even close. Literally, when I typed in, for instance, as I've said in the last episode, in this one too, that boker is more likely evening, and it would have to be based on what we now understand about the sun. It would be boker. Evening, boker. Morning, oreb. So when I put morning in, I literally, in some languages, was getting words that scored so high. I was getting veker, vekerta. Phonetically, they are literally almost the same. Okay? That would be like Bosnian, Bulgarian, because there are pockets of Germanics in those countries. If you look into the history of their countries, a lot of these countries are mixed pockets of either Germanics or Gauls with Slavs and or Arabs or Turks. So they still have those languages, though, that they've held on to. German has Abend, which is, and Dutch is Avan. They're very close. They still scored at least 5 points. Icelandic had Kavold. It scored like 20 points. And then back to Latvian, Vakars. How close is Vakars to Bakar? Lithuanian, Vakares. How close is that to Bakar? You had Norwegian had Kaveld. Scottish had Fisgar. So it still scored to 20 points. Swedish had Kaval. Ukrainian had Vakir. So when you go now to Oreb for morning, because see, Oreb scored high for morning instead of evening, as the Bible tells us. So almost every one of these languages that I used had at least 5 points scored for morning. Many of them had no points scored whatsoever, as being matches to Boker, which the Bible wants to tell us is morning. But as far as being close to Oreb, every one of them scored at least 5 points. A few scored 20 points. You got to figure, like in Germanic languages, what's most common is Morgen, Morgun, Ma'oreb. See, that's the thing. Morning is not just necessarily Oreb. I told you about the M at the front. Makes a concept a noun instance. If we added the M at the front, we would have Ma'organ, Ma'organ. And we just have that phonetic shift from B to G. Ma'organ, Ma'organ. Even Latvia had Norita. Still, the same vowels are phonetics in the same correct order. Most of these Germanic languages have that Ma'oreg, Ma'oreg. And Ma'oreg sounds a heck of a lot like Ma'oreb. So even modern languages echo not a close contest, overwhelmingly echo that those two terms are switched. In the case of Boker as evening, it scored 300 as opposed to 65. And in the case of Oreb, in fact, being morning, it scored 185 as opposed to 15. Not even a close contest. So now here's the thing. We have essentially every Bible, including the Masoretic texts out there, are telling us that these words are what they aren't. And now it's going to become difficult for people now, when they look at their Bibles, to now have to apply all of these terms, because there's a lot of them that they've swapped, changed, altered, finagled, you name it. Of course, one of the things we need to do is we do need new translations. Absolutely. The other thing that we need to do is discuss just more in detail, not only how Boker and Oreb are used, but they're most likely... Whoop, sorry, I just hit the hardware. The desk that I have, it's really cool, but it's the kind of desk that actually it will close and open. So most of the stuff I have sitting is on a, basically like a door that you would open downwards. And it has this hanging hardware, which is a real pain in the neck because I hit it a lot. We have to talk about those two terms just in depth for a while so that we can sort them out, because those are the gray area terms. Those are terms that are used and translated in so many different ways, both of them. Doing that whole exercise is not as key to understanding that everything has been swapped as everything that I've gone over in the last episode and this one. What this does now, though, is if you take all of the sun passages, you find all of the sun passages that have either ba or zera in them, or you find all of the passages that are using mazera or zera, and you can now apply that to the setting sun. And we know that the setting sun is in the west, the rising sun is in the east. And this is how our orientation is swapped. Now, this isn't the last word on the matter, but this is the establishment of the matter. Of course, I will probably have to in the near future do some kind of presentation on this so that it is presented in a concise, maybe a little bit more brief way. This is part of the point of the episodes of the OBRY Hours, to present these concepts to you, for you to understand where I'm coming from, the thought process, the work process, the whys, and to give you exhaustive examples, reasons to work through these things, to not hide things, to not do things like so many other presentations out there where they craft something to be deceptive. The OBRY Hours was made in part, and is made how it's made in part, to be extremely naked, to lay the material bare and naked for inquiry and examination. So with that, I am wrapping up the second part of Fiddler on the Sun. Israel is home. You can bet the fact that no matter what else anybody could do or say, what kind of sophistry they could use concerning the size of the land, the population of the people, and how it doesn't match from the Bible to what we can see the land of Palestine being able to sustain today. And when you consider all of the evidence that I present in the book that I am writing, which is very damning to Palestine, to the Middle East in general, and so on and so forth, that if you present this and you keep in mind what things have to be consistent, and the fact that you have so many passages that have Ba with Shamash, which has to be the coming son, and Zerah with Zamash, which has to be the dissipating or scattering son, and how Yum and how Lile are concrete, then you absolutely have the Great Sea on the eastern flank of the land of Canaan and not the western flank. And if that be the case, and all the evidence we've seen in the last two episodes says that is the case, then case closed, at least on Palestine and the Levant. And as far as the case for the actual land, that the actual people of Israel have actually been returned to, we will see more material on that as we go. And I pray for the soon action of Yahweh on this world and towards his people, because these dark times are truly dark indeed and have been for a very long time. So I am hoping and praying that they will soon see their consummation and their end, and that these dark days will soon be a thing of the past. Until the next time, I bid you peace.